What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Okay, so getting into all new, all different Guardians of the Galaxy, this is kind of a weird little situation here. And the reason why is because on the whole, when it came to all new, all different Marvel, most writers simply just sort of picked up where they left off before before Secret Wars started. For example, when it came to like the Spider-Man landscape, you had Superior Spider-Man, then you had a couple Spider-Man stories, then you went into Secret Wars, and then we came out and it just basically picked up where Spider-Man left off before Secret Wars ever happened. And so in a lot of ways, Marvel just kind of treated Secret Wars as if it never took place, which is kind of disappointing because the story was quite literally written to give Marvel a clean slate and to basically reboot everything. So it just kind of seemed like a squandered opportunity. But the fact remains here that Brian Michael Bendis did not go that route. And one of the funny things here is that Bendis is actually going to retcon his own story, which is really kind of weird. But the fact remains here that during the events of Secret Wars, we got what was called the Guardians of Nowhere. Now, the Guardians of Nowhere is not wildly important. And in fact, we can leave it out in its entirety, but there are a couple things that we need to reference. But in truth, I don't really see a reason to go back and cover Guardians of Nowhere. I mean, it's just part of the Secret Wars story. It was just kind of there, and there's maybe one or two things that matter. But what we end up finding out here is that Ben Grimm is effectively part of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, again, Brian Michael Bendis is basically going to focus on this once we get towards the end of this story, basically bringing Ben Grimm in. But for those of you guys who are kind of curious about what's been going on with the Fantastic Four, and I get this question a lot, where's Reed Richards, where's Valeria Richards, where's Susan Storm, Franklin Richards, that kind of thing. During Hickman's run in Secret Wars, basically the story ended with Franklin Richards, Valeria, Reed, and Susan alongside the Molecule Man creating new universes. And that's where like the clean slate came in, because it was basically them making universes and then just chucking them out into the void that would eventually become the multiverse. And so because of that, it was effectively a clean slate. Now, in terms of all new, all different Marvel, Ben Grimm was brought back, and so was Johnny Storm. But Johnny Storm basically was allied with the Inhumans because aside from being part of the Fantastic Four, there's really nothing you can do with his character. I mean, I wouldn't read a story about Johnny Storm by himself. He's just not that interesting to me. Ben Grimm is much the same way. And so what Marvel did is they basically paired them off with different things. Now, I would surmise with the kind of clout that Brian Michael Bendis has in Marvel, he most likely just said, I want Ben Grimm and I want to put him on Guardians of the Galaxy. And that was really the end of the discussion. But what Bendis does here when it comes to Kitty Pryde leading the Guardians of the Galaxy is it kind of comes out of the Guardians of Nowhere, but at the same time, it doesn't. In the sense that the Guardians of Nowhere was just kind of the characters who were there. They didn't know each other the way that we traditionally think of them, but they still function in some capacity as a group. In truth, again, we can basically disregard Guardians of Nowhere, and we can basically just say that at the end of our last story, when Peter Quill became Emperor of Spartax, he had to vacate his role as a Guardian of the Galaxy, and Kitty Pryde, his fiancée at the time, basically took his place. And that's all we really need to know. I mean, we still have like Agent Venom, we still got Groot, we still got Rocket, we still have Drax. We have the traditional people that we know. Now, one of the more controversial aspects of this story is that Kitty Pryde basically became Star-Lord. Now, for a lot of Peter Quill purists, and I don't know how many are actually out there, but for a lot of Peter Quill purists, looking at forum posts and so on and so forth, in their mind, Peter Quill was the only Star-Lord. And so to see somebody take up the mantle was kind of something that they were like, is this really what's going to be going on now? Like now we have somebody else who's Thor, we have somebody else who's Captain America. Like these are identities that belong to the characters. They're not simply namesakes, but in truth they are. I mean, Captain America is a name held by whoever it is that picks up the shield. Bucky Barnes has done it. Sam Wilson has done it. When it came to Thor, it's any number of people who can just pick up Thor's hammer and they become Thor. As controversial as that may be, if Marvel says it's true, then that means it's true because they're literally the ones making the story. So again, that's one of the things that kind of causes a lot of division among comic book fans is how they view comics versus how comics are presented by Marvel. So, it creates all kinds of different splits and dichotomies and so on and so forth. But the fact remains here that Kitty Pryde operating as really as the leader, so to speak, of the Guardians of the Galaxy actually brings her in direct conflict with Rocket Raccoon. Now, in truth, they're basically just kind of going against the Chitauri army. And the reason why is because they're basically just kind of snatching up an object from the Chitauri under the guise that the Chitauri themselves, if they have it, they're inherently going to do something nefarious with it. I mean, it's really just kind of a plot device designed to bring Kitty Pryde and Peter Quill back together again. But the fact remains here that with her coming into conflict with Rocket Raccoon, Rocket himself is in fact the leader of the team. He's the one that basically kind of reformed it, and it's usually always been that way. Like whenever it was that Peter Quill was not part of the Guardians, Rocket was the guy who was running the show. With Kitty Pryde being here under the mantle of Star-Lord, she's kind of stepping into the role that was the, more or less the leader of the team, but she really isn't. It's kind of one of those weird situations. It's really more of like perception than reality. But the fact remains here that, we kind of jump back to Spartax. And what we end up finding out here is that Peter Quill's life sucks. Like, it is a terrible life for him to lead as the Emperor of Spartax, because it's nothing but meetings all day about like defense strategies and like economics and how much money is being spent where. It's like the least exciting thing as an emperor. You would expect, if you were like an emperor of a planet, you would think of yourself as something akin to a warlord. Like, you're just leading these massive battles and huge conflicts and so on, but this is all politics, and that's really just kind of the role that's played. Now, in truth, we're actually going to find out that the people who were basically running the show, the council, are actually working against Peter Quill to effectively just kind of send him running. It's going to be one of these weird scenarios, but the funny little tidbits here, and that's what I like about what it is that Bendis does, is he injects these funny little things. The question that's asked by Ben Grimm is, there's a lot of things that are out there that I know about that just haven't been answered. For example, the Infinity Gauntlet. Like, no one knows where it is. No one knows where the Infinity Stones are. Like, what if the Chitauri had them, and what if the Infinity Gauntlet is inside this? Maybe it's not the Infinity Gauntlet. Maybe it's something deadlier. Maybe it's like the ultimate nullifier or something like that. But it's kind of funny because what Bendis is doing is kind of building on the idea of Ben Grimm. Remember, as part of the Fantastic Four, they've seen and done it all. Everything from fighting Galactus to meeting the One Above All. They've done everything. And so when Ben Grimm is out in space, he's kind of back home again. He's kind of where he feels like he belongs. But he's also like, look guys, there's some deadly stuff out there, and it may be inside this container. And the Guardians are just kind of like, well, I mean, we kind of have to see what's in it. We'd like to know what's inside. And so again, what they end up doing is traveling back to Spartax. Now again, their arrival here actually comes with the arrival of Gamora. Now, this basically feeds into more or less the idea of Gamora losing her powers of the Black Vortex. That's really one of the things that Bendis had focused on. The Black Vortex was really more of like a filler story arc. The all-new X-Men didn't really even care about the aftermath. None of that was really rolled over, aside from like, Archangel, or I guess Angel, having these, fiery wings as a result of his Black Vortex powers. But on the whole, the all-new X-Men line of stories just kind of treated it like it didn't exist. And even the Guardians of the Galaxy did so to a degree, but only insofar that they would reference it from time to time, and then Gamora had her powers, but that was really it. I mean, there wasn't like this great big huge aftermath, in Guardians of the Galaxy for the Black Vortex story. It was there and then it was done. But the idea here is that Gamora has basically been fighting a person by the name of Hala, and the goal here is to basically remove her powers, and that's exactly what happened. She basically says, look, I sacrificed the last of my Black Vortex powers just to get here and escape with my life. And this is kind of cool because what Bendis is doing is basically giving us this foe here who is almost nigh omnipotent. Now, the important thing to keep in mind is that Hala herself is not indestructible. I mean, she basically has your standard Kree physiology, so super strength, durability, that kind of thing. The same kind of abilities as like Marvel of the Kree. The issue with this is that she served as part of the Accuser Corps, but the difference is that she does not have a universal weapon. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, within the Kree landscape, you have what are called the Accuser Corps, and they're basically judge, jury, and executioner. They will show up to a place and they'll operate basically as the police force of the galaxy, even the universe to some degrees, and they'll basically say you are accused and you've been found guilty and you will stand for your crimes. Usually that means you're gonna die, but they have a universal weapon which is something akin to Thor's hammer, but a lot more capable in terms of what it can do. So it can create force fields, energy projections, different things like that. Thor's hammer can do some of that stuff, but we don't really see it very often. Like, we don't really see Thor using his hammer to summon thunderstorms. We usually see it to summon lightning, but that's really the extent of it. But Thor's hammer has actually had a lot of different capabilities over the years. But the fact remains here, with regards to Hala, she basically shares the namesake of the Kree homeworld, but she basically carries a staff that has energy projection capabilities or something along those lines. Bendis doesn't really go into a whole lot of detail. He just really kind of shows us what it can do by circumstance, as opposed to giving us, a line by line description of its capabilities. And that's pretty standard when it comes to Brian Michael Bendis writing. But the fact remains, during the Black Vortex line of stories, or during that event, Jason of Spartax, operating under the guise of Mr. Knife, the father of Peter Quill, had basically obliterated the home planet of the Kree. Now, of course, again, this is basically Bendis winding things down, leading into Secret Wars. But when Hala had returned back from a mission, she had found virtually everything that she knew destroyed and swore a blood debt, against the Guardians of the Galaxy. And that's really all we need to know about her origin story, about her backstory. We don't really need a whole ton of information. And that's kind of the good thing about the way that Bendis writes, is he'll basically just kind of be like, hey, this character did this, this, and now they want to fight the Guardians, and that's all we need. We don't need this great big huge grandiose complex explanation, not by any standard of measurement. It's interesting and it's there if we choose to delve into it, but it's not really a requirement. But the fact remains, Hala showing up here, it shows us a couple things. One, with her Kree physiology coming into play, she's able to withstand, punches from Ben Grimm. Now, this is kind of an interesting quagmire because I would surmise that in this story, Bendis is actually kind of powering down Ben Grimm because Ben Grimm is wildly strong. I mean, he's able to go toe to toe with the Incredible Hulk. Now, that's up to a point. The Incredible Hulk will just get so angry that he'll just just overpower Ben Grimm in the extreme, and Grimm won't stand a chance. But, in his normal basic, I'm a little miffed Incredible Hulk form, he'll be able to go toe to toe with Ben Grimm. The two of them have exchanged blows on a multitude of occasions. Ben Grimm has been able to go toe to toe with Thor. So showing him going toe to toe with Hala gives us one of two possibilities. Either Hala is wildly powerful in terms of her strength and durability, more so than we would expect from any normal Kree, or two, Ben Grimm is not as powerful as he used to be. Now, it could just be that, Bendis is just going by way of the story as it's written and just kind of calling it a day and showing us what Ben can do. But the fact remains, with Hala recovering from the attack, Drax actually takes her staff. Now, this is kind of interesting because this gives us a different perspective of her staff in the sense that not everybody can pick it up. So it's kind of like this Thor's hammer scenario. The difference is that if a person were to successfully be able to pick up Thor's hammer, the hammer's not going to issue like an energy backlash against them, right? Like it's not going to, send like a feedback and basically kill them or incapacitate them. They'll just be able to wield it and throw it at people. With a traditional view on how we look at Thor's hammer versus how we look at the staff has an energy feedback. So if a person tries to pick it up that shouldn't be able to lift it, the staff itself will basically shock them. Now, of course, with Drax being as durable as he is and being as powerful as he is, he's not going to be killed. But if it were a normal person like, Kitty Pryde, or a person like Star-Lord or Rocket Raccoon, if they were to pick it up, they would be completely and totally incinerated. Now, of course, this leads into a direct conflict between Hala and the Guardians, and then she incapacitates every last one of them, including Drax. So again, the implication that Bendis is giving us here is that Hala is really just that strong. She's really just that capable of a fighter. Now, of course, because of the fact that her motivation is all rooted in violence and wanting to see everything that Peter Quill loves come crashing down, she in turn basically intends to, destroy the planet Spartax itself. Now, at this point, we actually jump over to a guy by the name of Yotat. Now, Yotat was a guy who showed up in Guardians of Nowhere, and as far as I can tell, he was designed to be a one-off. He was just supposed to be a one-off character just for the sake of being able to give us stories about Guardians of Nowhere, but Bendis actually chose to roll him back in. Now, the cool thing is that Bendis is going to give us basically a brief overview of what his character's about here in a little bit, but for the moment, he's basically tracking down the Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, again, to kind of go ahead and just jump into this brief little synopsis real quick, Yotat was basically a guy in Guardians of Nowhere who was involved in almost every conceivable form of crime, whether it was trafficking, gambling, gun running, whatever the case may be. He was involved in it all. He would basically take his cut of everything, but in truth, he was more of a thug than anything else. The problem with this is he eventually came into contact with the Guardians of Nowhere, the Guardian Corps, and the Nova Corps themselves. Now, of course, the conflict between all these different guys was effectively stymied when Angela of the Thor Corps showed up during Secret Wars and just kind of brought his reign to an end really fast. But for the most part, he's just taken this to mean that the Guardians were meddling in his affairs. So it's not some complex basis behind why he's trying to get revenge on them. It's basically just him irritated that they meddled in his affairs and he wants revenge. It's pretty basic. I mean, it's really more akin to what you would expect from like the Kingpin, or Diamond Head, some villain back on Earth that's going against like Daredevil or Spider-Man or somebody like that. It's very human and very base. So this is really Bendis telling us there's not much meat and potatoes behind the character of Yotat. He's a pretty basic guy. Like he's not really complicated by any standard of measurement. Now, of course, he's also brought, or at least also visited by the Queen Brood. Now, the reason why this matters is because of the fact that in our previous videos on Guardians of the Galaxy, we had talked about how the Galactic Council, as it had been led by Jason of Spartax, had basically turned against him. But with Jason of Spartax being ousted from the planet Spartax as Emperor, the various members of the Galactic Council saw this as an opportunity to basically remove Spartax from the equation and take them out of being the role of protectors of the galaxy or leaders of the galaxy, effectively creating a power vacuum that would in turn allow them to take Spartax's place. Now, the reason why this matters is because of the fact that what the Queen Brood did, with the Supreme Intelligence basically being destroyed, all the other members of the Galactic Council being obliterated, the Queen Brood actually traveled to the negative zone and met with a nihilist. Now, this is really kind of cool because this is one of the first indications that we get of a nihilist existing in all new, all different Marvel. We knew it was only a matter of time. I mean, you can't do a story like Annihilation from 2006 where a nihilist invades the main Marvel universe with the intention of just wiping out all life, kidnaps Galactus, uses him as a power source, all that kind of stuff. You can't have a story like that and then just never use the nihilist again. He's too intrinsic to the Marvel cosmology, and at this point, just too popular of a character to let go. And so because of that, we basically have this scenario taking place where the Brood Queen intends to basically use the forces of Annihilus and the Negative Zone to launch a campaign against the main Marvel Universe. Now, whether or not this will lead into something similar to Annihilation, I don't know, and I highly doubt it, to be honest. Annihilation was such a massive event in and of itself, and the story was a necessity when it was first written. I have a hard time believing we would see something just like that, because what you're talking about is a force numbering in the billions, just invading the main Marvel Universe and just sweeping through all things like a plague. I mean, it was insane. You know, the Annihilation wave. I mean, it just went through world after world after world, you know, and it just swept through everything that it came across and crushing everything in its path. It was literally an army of bugs. That's really what it was. The Annihilation wave was just an army of giant bugs, but it was kind of cool to see, because in the end, you know, it was just heroes all over the place, all over the universe, just totally being crushed. It actually took place during Civil War, and it's a great story in and of itself. I've already covered it, and I believe that Benny over Comic Storian is going to be covering that too. So it's a really cool, especially when Galactus is finally freed. Man, he unleashes hell on the Annihilation wave. It's the coolest thing. He destroys like 2/3 of the forces in a single blast. I guess it's crazy when he's finally unleashed. But the fact remains here that with Hala just kind of running amok on everything, the Guardians are more or less kind of forced in a situation where they have to free who they can. They kind of have to make their escape and leave the planet behind. This is kind of cool, because what it shows us is that the Guardians are just as much about strategy and tactics as they are about being goofy and silly. It's one of these things where sometimes in order to win a war, you have to lose a battle. You have to sacrifice those pawns. It's a classic game of chess. You know, sacrifice 3 pawns, put your queen in the right spot, and the game is over. You know, it's very much similar to what's happening right here. You know, they've got to kind of sacrifice the planet to a degree, knowing that Gamora is still there, knowing that Hala is probably going to take her frustrations out on Gamora, knowing that Peter Quill's been rescued and Hala's going to be, you know, enraged even further. They have to make that sacrifice. Now, in truth, they're not going to give up the life of Gamora. I mean, that's not going to happen. You know, when Gamora jumps back down to the surface, starts facing off against Hala, you know, the idea here is, hey, look, you know, if we've got to leave her behind, it's not going to be the biggest deal in the world. She's going to basically live. I mean, Hala's capable. Hala can kill Gamora if she chose to, but at the end of the day, she has information that she wants. Now, with regards to Gamora getting absolutely pummeled, I mean, she's getting wrecked, like her eyes all swole up and everything. I mean, she's getting just absolutely destroyed. But the Guardians are banking on this, because the Guardians are kind of looking around and saying, hey, look, Hala wants to know where Star-Lord is. It's not enough for her to destroy Spartax. She wants Peter Quill to see it, because in her mind, Peter Quill, his father, the whole 9 yards, the legacy of the ruling class of Spartax is what led to the destruction of her homeworld. And so in her mind, she wants Star-Lord to see the loss of what he holds dear and to feel the same pain she felt. So it's very visceral for her. It's very real for her. And it's really kind of a cool scenario to unfold. But the fact remains, you know, with Gamora getting absolutely decimated, the Guardians just kind of show up. Now, of course, Rocket's like, look, guys, we need a plan. It's one of the things that he was kind of talking about. So we don't really know what their plan is for the moment. All that really happens is Star-Lord tries to reason with her, tries to say, hey, look, I'm not the one who destroyed your homeworld. My father was the one who destroyed your homeworld. But of course, his father's no longer part of the equation. And so at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. You know, she basically says, look, that may very well be the case, but if the only way for me to get my revenge is to get revenge on you, despite the fact that your father was the one who did it, then be that as it may. Now, of course, this is when the plan comes into play, and it's actually really well engineered, and it shows us how well the Guardians work together. I mean, he's serving as a distraction here. He's basically talking to Hala in order to take her mind away from what's going on around her. And in this moment of distraction, Kitty Pryde pops out of nowhere, uses her phasing powers, and drags Hala halfway into the ground, allowing for Drax to pummel her, you know, kind of make her a little dizzy, make her a little bit punch drunk, and then the thing, Ben Grimm, to jump from, you know, 1,000 miles in the air and just land on top of her. And so with Hala more or less being defeated, you know, that's really kind of the end of that. Well, then suddenly Yotat makes his appearance. Now, again, this is not long. This is not drawn out. This is a pretty quick skirmish. It's him just kind of being an opportunist, kind of trying to take out the Guardians at the right time. But again, there's really not much going here. I mean, there's a little bit of, you know, discussion here and there, you know, some talking in between the two of them, but for the most part, he's subdued. I mean, he's kind of beat pretty easily by Drax the Destroyer, mostly because of the fact that Drax is the main guy that he's going after. I mean, Drax is really kind of the guy that he has the most beef with. And so things move past pretty quick. I mean, Drax and Ben Grimm kind of working together, it's an almost unstoppable force of sheer physical strength. And so with Yotat basically being, you know, being defeated and so on and so forth, Peter Quill goes back to his normal role. But this is when we find out that, again, the council was kind of working against him. Now, in truth, the council was working against Peter Quill because they were being prodded by the Brood Queen. And so with her basically pushing them in the position of pushing Peter Quill to the point that he would basically just quit being president, well, now they're leaderless. I mean, they have a council, but at the end of the day, the council can never really vote on any one thing that will benefit the country or benefit the planet consistently. That's really the role of the king. You know, that's really the role of the emperor, is to be the guy who basically says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do it by force. The council can vote, you know, and they have voted consistently, and they have voted, you know, with each other. But the question becomes, what happens when a situation unfolds that's not in all their mutual interests? And that's what the Queen Brood is betting on. You know, the time that will come when there will be some kind of decision that has to be made that will split the council. And that is the point at which she and a nihilist will step in, and they'll basically conquer Spartax, or at least that's their intention, is to conquer Spartax. But again, this is just kind of the all new, all different Guardians of the Galaxy, a different take on the team, familiar faces, and it still kind of works. But again, this is all really just kind of led into Peter Quill going back to being the leader of the team proper. But with that being said, guys, if you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.